You know what stage you're on, Levon?
I got no idea, Mike.
Well, I think you'll play at any stage. As long as you
Hey,
set it down.
if they'll pay me, I'll play. I'll play out beside the stage. It don't matter to me, baby.
Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries, brought to you by Treble Media. They're an independent music journalism site, and they're great. Treblezine.com. Support them on Patreon, patreon.com/treblezine, et cetera, et cetera. They're good people. They pay their writers, not their podcasters, but their writers. And we love it. I'm Dave Litzebram, here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
And we are here with our returning champion, our friend and fellow music podcaster, grinding in the music podcast mines, Eamon O'Flynn. Say hi.
Hello. Nice to be back.
Known
Overdue.
Yeah, overdue.
Long,
yeah.
It's been a long time, I think.
I know. It's been somehow we keep doing this thing. We both keep doing our thing, and here we are.
Yeah.
We're known worldwide for the Record Roulette podcast.
Yes.
That both Andy and I have been on, and you made me listen to a Bob Marley album, so there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here we are. I forgive you.
I will have you know that in this current season, what we're doing is we're letting people pick their album off of the list, because as far as I'm concerned, it's still random. So maybe you should come back, and then you can pick something that's not Bob Marley.
I will come back if I'm invited, but I would rather have it be random. I think the randomness adds a sort of a tension
Yes,
to the whole thing.
It does.
Whereas if you just had me blather on about, I don't know what's even on the list or whatever, something that I like.
Yeah,
I don't
nothing
know.
by Guided by Voices is on it. So it's fine.
Okay, well then this list sucks and I'm out. It should be 100 Guided by Voices albums and then 400 other.
All right. Hold on. So, actually, go ahead. Continue setting up the episode. What are we doing here today?
Oh, what are we talking about? I forgot.
Yes.
See, Eamon has selected the film "Ain't in It for My Health," a film about Levon Helm, from 2010, directed by Jacob Hatley, and it is, of course, about Levon Helm, the late great drummer / singer / other instrumentalist from the band. He was, of course, the best part of the band because he was the only American. We're all in agreement about that.
Nope.
and
Now's the time that I say that I'm Canadian.
Yes. Broadcasting from Canada.
From icy Canada.
So not only is this your second time on the show, but it's your second time discussing a film about the band.
Yes.
So we've done 2 episodes about The Last Waltz and 2 about the band.
Throw in Festival Express, which is also basically about the band.
Yeah, and
we're like a very small step away from just being the band podcast.
We're scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's a classic albums about the Brown album, right?
Yeah, we'll do that eventually. That's very clearly going to happen.
Is there? Yeah, if there's a Rink Danko documentary that somebody threw together out there, call us because we'll do it.
Our friend from the band podcast,
is Tyrell.
Tyrell is putting together, I believe, it was going to be a podcast and now just a narrative, was going to be a documentary and now just a narrative podcast about Richard Manuel.
Okay. Well, we could talk to him about that because he's a good guy.
And Tyrell is going to be on our podcast pretty soon. And I immediately, as you were saying this, I was thinking, well, I think the obvious next step for you guys is a re-listen podcast to his podcast.
Yes,
that's right.
So, like, you go back, you re-listen, you comment on what he said. There we go. It's like you got gold moving forward, right?
Yeah, yes. But we should do it on YouTube so we have those reaction faces. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So, tell us why wait. Go ahead, Andy. Do your thing.
I have a question for Eamon because
sure.
I'm.
Oh yeah, we discussed this.
So I think I brought this up to you when you were on last time talking about Once We're Brothers, the Robbie Robertson documentary, very briefly. But I want to delve here. I want to understand this. So your episode of about American Beauty, the Grateful Dead.
Yes. Yep.
It's okay that you didn't like it that much. I'm not here to interrogate that. But I do want to understand, because you don't just like the band. You know the band
Mm-hmm.
forwards and backwards, all over. You know, the obscure post the band material from Danko's career, etc. You're a real head
Yeah.
for the band.
Okay.
And my question is, like, how could it be that the first time you heard the Grateful Dead was when that random number generator said the number next to their listing on the
Mhm.
Rolling Stones list? Like, they played Watkins Glen with them, they did Festival Express with them. Like, I'm genuinely
Famously,
curious.
they both crushed it at Woodstock.
Yeah, I'm genuinely curious. Like, how did you go that deep into the band and never were like, let's look at this thing that's right next door?
So I'll tell you, Record Roulette, my podcast, which is available on all platforms, just in case
Yes.
anyone wants to know. I mean, the whole point of that was basically that I'd put myself in a weird little corner of like listening to the same three things over and over again. But I'll actually kind of blow your mind here. I do love the band, but I didn't listen to the band until I was in like university. I didn't start that until I mean, like that was quite a while ago now, but I grew up with like Queen and ELO and the Beatles, and they were never a part of that at all. And I remember one time seeing The Last Waltz on TV and being like, who the hell are these guys? And I know, I actually remember really clearly. I was in my second year of university. Like, I remember where I was the first time I ever knowingly heard the band do anything. And so I think my answer to that question is this: I fell into this absolute pit of like, who the hell are these guys? And just went crazy deep dive. And it never really occurred to me that like there'd be other people I'd care to listen to
Okay.
around them, or similar in this, it's a similar genre, I think.
Yeah. So like you're going deep and somebody's like, they played the largest concert ever. And you weren't like,
It's like the one with Jimi Hendrix.
yeah, with who, you didn't go like, with whom?
No,
what else happened that day?
I mean, you're really knocking holes in the whole I have a music podcast thing.
No. It's because
no.
anyone who listens to your podcast will quickly find you to be well spoken on the topic and well read on the topic. It's mostly just a curiosity to me.
I mean, I think that's also, we did a David Bowie album recently where I basically was like, I don't think I've actually listened to this album from top to bottom. And this is a person that I had been listening to when I was a kid. I think it's one of those things. There's plenty of blind spots. We all have our blind spots.
I think there's no shame in having gaps in your whatever. The books you've read, the music you've listened to, like that's life, right? You can't have been up on everything, and everybody has different tastes. It's just kind of funny that, I mean, Andy, you kind of grew up around in a kind of a deadhead kind of community. Like your college was,
certainly my college,
a crunchy kind of vibe there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Eamon, where you went to university, but maybe that just was not the scene there.
And I almost would love to like blame it on this idea of the band being from right around here, because, like Robbie Robertson was born, I don't know, like a 30-minute drive from where I'm sitting right now. Richard, even closer. Rick, probably like 50-minute drive, and from where I'm born, Garth was born like 30-minute drive away from there. Like I'm from like basically where all these guys, apart from Levon, are from. So you'd be like, oh, that's probably why, but it has nothing to do with that at all. It just so happens. I remember when I figured that out, and I was like, holy shit, they're all from right around here.
It's even cooler.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah, holy, this is someone I can like be proud of as a Canadian. Celsius.
Okay. Yeah. Celsius.
These guys describe the temperature in the same system I do.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible.
Yeah.
All right.
And virtually every person besides Levon.
Are you done hassling our friend?
I'm all right. I'm done hassling. I do.
I think it's reasonable. It was all reasonable.
Okay. So we've your bona fides as a band fan are well established. We've already kind of gone over the basics here in the previous episode, which I'm sure everybody will have listened to, or pause it now, go back, listen, because this is like watching one of those Marvel movies. Like you need to be fully versed in order to have any idea what's happening.
The whole episode is Easter eggs that are only now 2 years later about to pay off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It's what we've all been waiting for. So, I think I think the narrative of and Andy's not always, you're not going to agree exactly, but the narrative that I perceive as far as our dealings with the band are that we watched the film Once We're Brothers, which was a Robbie Robertson joint, and we kind of kicked it around a little bit, and then Robbie passed, and then we recently did our second annual Last Waltz rewatch with world famous Robbie Stan, Julia Swanson, and so I think we gave Robbie his flowers that day, as was appropriate. But now we're kind of steered right back into the other side of the grudge. So I don't want this to be a rehash of the, that's not the direction I think. I mean, it can go wherever it goes, but I just don't want to go back to kicking on Robbie. But we got to address with this movie and what it brings to us. So let's just start from here. Like, where'd you first encounter the movie?
So I mean, if we're gonna like get rid of this Robbie stuff, I'm just gonna toss this. Oh, okay.
A dossier.
No. We can get into whatever. I just I feel like we're I don't want to mess with our karma. The man just died.
Yeah, that's true. I heard about the movie a long time ago. I hadn't watched it until relatively recently when you and I had been in touch. I've read a bunch. I'd kind of not so much avoided it. It wasn't really available anywhere. It's not like a super available documentary, at least in Canada, because he's the American band member. I assume we choose to suppress all of this information.
All the copies are confiscated at the border, as I understand.
Yes, exactly. The digital border too. We are very, very careful about these things.
Just like China, you've got your own internet up there. This is just not allowed.
I remember hearing about this coming when it came out and thinking, this is, a lot of the focus was on things around Robbie and the band. And I was actually kind of blown away by how little of that is kind of in it, is kind of is a part of it. I think that it's really tough to, as someone who has watched Once We're Brothers, I think it's really tough to watch this and not try to kind of analyze that or compare the way that they're framed and their narratives, because they're so tied directly to those two people. But at the same time, I think that it was, I kind of avoided it because I thought that it was just going to be Levon spends an hour and a half complaining about Robbie. And I'm not even sure Robbie, he doesn't say Robbie's name at any point. I think Robbie's name comes up maybe 3 times the entire film. And it's other people, obviously. So it's,
and even those other people kind of talk around it, right? It's like they're speaking in euphemism. If you know what they're talking about, you don't have to use much imagination, but it's not, but no one wants to just rehash that, it seems like, basically,
Yeah. Least of all him. Yeah. He's, and I think that I agree that we probably shouldn't spend a lot of time going back and forth over the same ground. I do think that there's some new stuff that's in this because it is from a different perspective, and it's the same issues, but it's a different perspective. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't deliver any perspective on the band. Levon never does that in this film, and it's really kind of surprising to me. It really kind of threw me off a little bit, because I thought for sure there was going to be a bit of that. And when he talks about the band, it's about Rick, and it's about Richard, and it's about feeling abandoned and feeling like they don't get the appreciation they deserve when winning a lifetime achievement award as a group. That these guys are gone. How is this helpful now?
The Levon talking about Richard Manuel is both in this, and if you go back to the we mentioned before, the classic albums episode about the Brown album, like, he is never happier than when he is describing a memory of Richard Manuel. The Richard Manuel the guy, Richard Manuel the singer, like, he is just lights up whenever he is describing that guy. And like, I do kind of think that and like a couple parts about Rick are the insights you get into the band here, but they're not insights by way of like relitigating the story as much as insights by way of him just talking very sweetly and earnestly about two family members,
Yes.
and or allowing, Rick Danko's widow to do the same or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of dial it back a little bit, the movie so it comes out in 2010. It is sort of filmed, I guess, maybe a few years before that, and
It was a 3-year period of filming, basically.
right,
Yeah.
most of most of the movie is contemporaneous, meaning you're with Levon in his house in whatever, at the time, and he's very old and very sick. Well, certainly very sick. Let's put it that way. And he ends up passing away in 2012. So there's like a little title card added to the end of the movie about his death. But you're seeing him. He had cancer of the larynx or throat, something like that.
Yeah,
and
throat or something.
yeah, and then he was, I guess, in remission, and then it came back, and his voice is in various states of decay during the movie. And there is some footage that they'll cut back and forth, biographical stuff, and they'll occasionally go to I don't remember the guy's name, the guy that wrote one of the books about the band, but most of the movie is like this sort of verite, not staged, very like in the moment in his life, conversations with him, and then you see him like playing music and going on tour a little bit and dealing with doctors and just reminiscing about things, and it's just kind of like hanging out with the dude is really the idea. And man, he's a good hang,
the best hang. Like, just say it.
All timers.
There's absolutely no one I would rather hang out with than Levon Helm when he's in, like basically dying. He seems like as fun a person to be around as there could be. The whole movie is people hanging on his every word. Him telling stories, him telling jokes, him shooting the shit, and like
riding a tractor.
Riding a tractor, yeah.
Good
It's
donuts.
great.
Yeah. I could listen to him talk about a platypus for like another, I don't know, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Yes.
It's
yeah, the platypus scene. It's probably I would say the best platypus scene in any rock doc we've seen.
Well, I mean, the scene that sticks with me, and so when I had watched this before, I had the scene had so stuck with me. I thought it was like somewhere in the middle of the movie, and that it had like stood out. Now I realize it's like the first thing is he plays this festival. He loads up the tour bus. He gets in. He's driving, and rather than going back to like the bed in the bus and getting some sleep, Levon wants to sit up front with the drivers and debate with them the freeway routes that they'll be taking.
Oh yeah,
the best way to get there. And it's just like there's a certain type of like old man wisdom of like, what could be better than you and a professional driver, and you're gonna decide whether going from the 168 through a Hagerstown to catch up with the 71 and take that north right on through to Utica is the best way to go, or whether you do better to take the 71 instead. It's crazy.
This is road dog like
Road dog
life.
stuff.
I mean, this is a guy who's been on the road for whatever 50 some years at this point.
You could take that right on through Hagerstown, catch up. It's so good.
I mean, he spent most of his life on a tour bus.
That was a good impression of the haggardness of his voice at this point too. I do think it's very interesting that he never sits down for an interview in this thing, right? Like you never get an interview with him really at this point. And apparently, according to the director, anytime he tried to, Levon would kind of like wander off. Like he'd be like, "No, I'm not going to do this."
Well, I mean, it's like it's David. You alluded to this that the biographer that comes up in all manner of the band documentaries that you may have seen. Like this is a Levon Helm movie, in part produced by Amy Helm, in which all of the exposition about his life comes by way of a biographer, which is usually what you get from like the documentary that doesn't have the rights. has
Mhm.
to lean on the biographer to come in, like
Right.
we have direct access to the source here, but he's just like not willing to say that into the microphone,
Anything, say
Yeah.
anything. Like he's not. It's not even just the band stuff. It's like he just doesn't want to talk to anyone. It's so weird. It's but yeah, you're right. It's Barney Hoskins, I think is the
Yeah.
guy's
Barney
name.
Hoskins, that's his name.
And
Right. Give him his props.
yeah, give him his props. But apart from him and like Larry Campbell, I don't think anyone else like speaks directly to camera as though they've been sat down. Maybe the entire film.
Yeah, maybe Amy once or something like
Maybe
that.
once.
And
Yeah.
even that's like not a sit down. It looks like they just like stopped her in the kitchen and they were
Yeah.
like, hey, turn this way. You know?
I got a question for you. Can you answer it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think maybe the way I kind of teed up the movie makes it seem like it's going to be a bummer. Like, oh, it's a documentary about this bitter old guy who's on the verge of bankruptcy and is, dying. And yet, like, it's not that, it's not that. I mean, it is, his, I don't know, his lust for life comes through. You know what I mean? Like, he's like determined to
Yeah.
squeeze. Like, I mean, that's the title. Like, ain't it for my health? Like,
They achieve something that I think is really worth commending because it plays like like a hangout, like a movie you want to just put on and spend time with, even though it's basically about his like the very end of his life. But they turn it into a celebration, and the number of like scenes where there's him telling a story, making a room full of people laugh, and then his face, lights up from having done that. And then the scene carries away with a little bit of like montage and some, a music drop.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know, I'm a sentimental guy, I guess. Cause I just spend that whole time smiling. I'm just like wistful about how much fun it seems to be around the guy.
Yeah. Right. So I wrote down a lot of stuff, got a lot of pages out here. I don't actually do this for my own podcast, but for yours, I was sitting in front of a TV writing notes like a crazy person. And so I two things. One, I wrote, and I just don't want to pass up just in case we don't get back to this, but I can't believe these are his teeth, but then he takes a bite of the apple later on.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
spent a lot of time being like, there's no way those are his real teeth, right? And then the guy just goes munching on an apple, and I'm like, you know what? I think they put that shot in there to prove it.
Yeah, well,
like
but
There's a comment that
Yeah.
he comes from stock of people with really good teeth.
Yeah.
yeah, and
It's
it's
a weird.
well,
very
it's his
strange
daughter's
line.
like I don't know if they were married or whatever, but it's his daughter's mom or one of his,
Yeah.
and she kind of like says like he comes from a stock of people with really, really good teeth, and it sounds like she's saying like good bodies, and then she kind of flushes and like turns away from the camera, like you know what I mean? It's like after all these years, there's the spark is still there. And it's like, but it's the teeth are impressive. Like he was built to last as far as he could go.
But the other thing that I put down right below that is he lived the life he wanted to live. He did what he wanted to do, even if it was hard. And I think that there's that's just a very, to me, that's what I got out of this is a guy, he started the Midnight Rambles in large part because he got cancer, because he needed money. He kept doing them. There's a bit of money talk in this thing about how do we make more money? How do we, kind of set ourselves up a little bit better, about how everyone's struggling. Again, going back to Rick and Richard, neither one of them was rolling cash either. There's a bit of that, but he's just in his element doing what he wants to do. He's in basically, I mean, sure, a back room, a barn, like where the Midnight Rambles are happening, and just playing the songs he wants to play, and then hanging out with the people he wants to hang out with around a table.
Yeah.
And it's just like the guy's doing what he wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of those scenes, it's an early one where he's hanging out with Billy Bob Thornton and Chris Robinson.
Yeah.
And you can tell Levon's having a good time when he's got the red Solo Cup, which, this is a few years before the red Solo Cup becomes like this corny thing that like they have like pop country songs about or whatever. But he's like, he's clearly has not stopped drinking. And nor has he stopped smoking. He's hanging out with them, like just having like a college level conversation about the weed that they're about to smoke and his opinions on it. He's just like giving a full breakdown of like where it's grown and and why it's better than other stuff. But then when people are about to leave, he says like, well, if you ever want to come through, this is all we're gonna be doing. Like, I'm gonna be playing shows here, and after the show, I'm gonna be hanging out, telling stories.
Yeah.
And it's like it's awesome. There's not much more to say about it except it's like, hell yeah, man. Glad you found it.
I mean, he talks about a little bit about his childhood and about how he was like 17 and chopping cotton and looked up and saw an airplane going overhead and was like, wherever that plane's going, I got to get on there. Like, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like he gave up a promising career as a doctor or something to go on the road, I mean, it seems like he was destined for a hard life one way or the other. So the hard life of a touring musician, which has its ups and downs and problems, he does not regret making that choice instead of staying in the cotton field. Like, it's not, that would not have been a smoother road for him, I don't think.
I got a feeling that he would say, putting words in his mouth here, but that he would say that the road he chose is much easier than a lot of. Because this is the guy who left the band for a little while and worked on an oil rig.
Yeah, like, I love that.
Guy who knew hard work, right? Like, he knew this, which never comes up. I don't think they mention that at all. They don't mention.
No,
he did some acting later on. Like, it's interesting what they choose to spend time on. For the limited amount of background that they do give you, the stuff they choose to spend time on, the stuff they just kind of leave out as though it didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, that is still the part of the band's story that like I'll be least surprised about if 50 years from now somebody's like, all right, by the way, that was a joke. We joked. We were joking. We didn't actually have our drummer leave the most famous tour that had ever happened to that point to go work on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but by all accounts, that's true. So for now, that's true.
He was really suspicious of anything that got too big, though. Like, I think that there's a lot of that in there. I mean, same thing with the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys. Like, he says it's engineered by the suits. Goddamn sales gimmick is what he calls that. Like,
that's all that is. That's all that is.
Yeah, every time there's something that's a little bit too big. I think that this is part of the not to get too into this, but like, this is part of the rift with Robbie as well. Is like, Robbie kind of goes into that world that Levon is just not going to fit into necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Robbie went
hang out with Scorsese.
Robbie went Hollywood. You know what I mean? And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, he became Martin Scorsese's, musical partner, and he did great work, and that's awesome. But that is a totally different life circumstance than the the road that Levon and them chose. And like, Rick kind of tried to become not a pop star, but he kind of tried to be the solo artist who busted out of the band, and we know how that went. But Levon just kept on keeping on, I guess. But yeah, I mean, they don't mention that he was the voice of Chuck Yeager in The Right Stuff. Like, all this great, things in it. They don't really mention barely The Last Waltz, which is like, I know he has his bitterness about that and how it was put together and so forth. But, it's, considered among the greatest concert films of all time. And it's just not relevant.
So there's a moment they're hanging out. Billy Bob decides he's going to ask him a question. And Billy Bob says, your first two albums, you guys were the critical darling. And before Billy Bob can really get to the question, Levon just jumps in and is like, well, yeah, after that, it was all bullshit, basically. He's like, that it was dead after that point. What was Billy Bob gonna ask?
He seemed to be talking about how they were media darlings before that. He seemed to be going down a
like,
road
have they turned against you type deal or something?
Yeah, reviews, like, you guys like seemed like everything was going so well. People were saying you were so interesting and so great and everything. But I don't think the reviews even for their last album were okay. Like, like pretty good. Like, I don't think they ever got like absolutely tanked by horrible reviews or anything.
Well, I didn't mention this to you, Andy, but we have Billy Bob Thornton on the line. So.
Good.
Academy Award winner Billy Bob Thornton. You want to join in? No, I was curious about that too, because it just seemed like Levon took that opportunity to tell the story he wanted to tell. Exactly. And Billy Bob Thornton was not going to Like he was
not gonna be like, no. Let me get back to what I was saying.
You know, to
You're a
Billy Bob, I
dirt
don't
farmer.
know that much about Billy Bob Thornton, but to his credit, he lets Levon, you know, be in his element
Just
and is just happy to be there in this moment.
Yep.
He's a great Rock Dogs cameo. You know what I mean? Like sometimes people will pop up and you're like, oh, that guy, and it really works. And yeah, he's great. His little moment in this is great. But
and you can tell he really like it's really meaningful to him. Like the music that Levon produced with the band is super meaningful to him. Like and even that tiny little bit of screen time, you can tell how much it means to him be sitting beside Levon Helm.
and they're like,
yes. Oh yeah,
they're
absolutely.
two of the biggest people ever to come out of Arkansas. Right? I mean, it's like those guys and the Clintons. I don't know, you know. I mean, it's I'm sure there's plenty of other people, but like in terms of like that type of celebrity in that era and whatever, like, you know, Billy Bob talks about how when he shows up to the house in Woodstock for the Ramble, like he's like, this is just like being home. Like all of a sudden you're in the woods and there's dogs coming up to you and it's just like how I grew up. And Levon's like, yeah, I mean, this is the best. And you know, it's like Billy Bob obviously went Hollywood in his own way. But you know, you could tell he's you know, connected to the roots there in that little moment. You don't really get much of Chris Robinson. It's like he's there. You see Billy Bob, they're talking, and then Chris Robinson comes by to say goodbye. And you're like, oh, it would have been nice to have a little moment with that guy, but you don't, you know, that's all right.
Yeah.
It's not his story.
No. And I mean, I love Chris Robinson's voice, but I've actually never found him to be an especially interesting character, if I'm perfectly honest. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, not with who he's got to compete with in that room.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Right. He's a little man on that pole. Respect that.
The one thing I thought was actually surprising that we didn't get more of, we get a lot of Levon struggling with his voice, but the struggle with his voice is always kind of portrayed as it's a medical issue / an obstacle to performing live.
Yeah.
And there's not, and it's probably because of the person they're talking about. Like he's not going to say this, but I'm surprised they don't try and get into you know, like the psychological impact of a person who has a very recognizable voice losing his voice. He lost it once when he had cancer originally. He struggled to get it back. When we're seeing him in this film, it's very scratchy. Like it's sometimes not there at all. And it reminds me of something with Johnny Cash late in his life. I think it was one of his last albums came out. I can't remember who said this, but they said he was struggling because he just didn't have the control over his voice anymore. It was like the thing that he could always go back to, that he always had that voice. And for Levon, it's you know, with exactly what you're saying about like he's sick. He's going to die soon. Like he's you know, he's going to get cancer again soon. Like it's going to come back. The director said there's a sense of mortality that was present from the beginning of them filming. Like they kind of felt it almost.
Yeah.
But it's not in that kind of way of like, how is this affecting him? Like it's weird. It's not, you know, you don't get for a film that's all about a guy who had cancer and is about to get cancer again. You don't get a lot of like, what is the impact on Levon himself?
Yeah. I mean, there's I think there's just two, but there's at least two scenes where he goes to a doctor and they shove something up his nose to be able to take a look at his lungs.
Let me just say,
and
if you've ever had that instrument shoved into your nose, I had a sinus issue where they had to do that, and boy, it's not fun. Like Levon takes it at like his, you know, in his condition with a lot more stoicism than I did. Don't recommend it.
All I wrote down in my notes of that is, you know, no surprise, but Levon, tough son of a bitch.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
You know,
Sorry, go ahead.
And like, you know, I guess you could imagine a version of this where it's going to be like, oh, we're gonna have a bunch of scenes with him like waking up and puking from you know, radiation treatment or something like that. We're gonna see the weight fall off of him. We're gonna see all of his family members shave their heads in solidarity. You know, we're gonna get the greatest hits of cancer survival films, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what they want to do here. It's like the mortality hangs over this as like a collective understanding that everybody in this movie has, that like Levon is at the end of his life. There's no one thinks he's going to live for 20 more years. But it's not, you know, it's not like everyone's just like walking around kicking kicking stones, bemoaning the like injustice that this great guy has to die. They're just happy to have the last few years with him that they have.
Yeah.
And they're making music the whole time too, you know, like they're going to make this time count.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's a lot of music in the film, and there's a lot of him singing, or struggling to sing or whatever. And he has the good fortune that the material that he's associated with, both with the band and the kind of country, folk, Americana type, music that is his thing, that he grew up with, that he knows, that he sings, that he loves, it is, it works for that circumstance of life as well, which Johnny Cash had the same thing. Like, I mean,
Frankly,
you and
Jerry, I've always
well,
thought
yeah,
that
but like,
like I've always thought that in the like people think that the 90s dead is terrible, and some of it is, but I think that some of the songs like Morning Dew,
yeah,
Stella Blue,
sure.
actually really lent themselves to the fragility of Jerry's voice at that point, and it actually made them stand out in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, a year or so ago, you and I went and saw Dead and Co. And like right at the end of the concert or near the end, Bob Weir, who's like approaching 80 now, something close to 80, 75 or something like that. He sang the old blues song "Death Don't Have No Mercy," and it was real heavy. Like Bob Weir seems healthier than me. He could certainly kick me down the street if he wanted to, and I hope he lives for many many years. But he's seen a lot. And to sing that kind of material at that age is different than like a 25-year-old, Jerry singing or whatever.
Right.
And Bob Dylan, the same thing. I mean, obviously Bob Dylan and the band, the music's tied so together. And he's out there at 82, singing these songs about mortality, and it really, it works. And so, it's harder when you have somebody who, like, I don't know, Steven Tyler, doesn't bring the same gravitas at his advanced age with the material he's singing. And
he can't hit the notes on Crying anymore.
yeah, exactly. Or, I mean, look, I love the Stones, but sometimes Mick Jagger's posturing at his age can be a little ridiculous. But yeah, with Levon, like I mean, first of all, he has a religious background to have a certain approach to these things, but the music seems to really carry him through because he has been living with these, the mortality and all these issues in life through his work for all these years, and now it kind of pays off when you have like a really old person. I don't know, it's like a weird kind of perspective, but yeah, it's like he has the equipment to deal with it.
Yeah, he's not the reason why I don't think they spend the time on it is because the way he approaches the world is you just keep carrying on.
Yeah.
Whatever the issue is, you just keep walking. And I think that's how he approaches these things. But at the same time, maybe that's just me wanting to understand the psychology of someone who's kind of working on that stuff rather than just being like, oh, he's seeing a doctor and they're getting sticking something up his nose again.
Right. Yeah.
Like, well, I want to know what does he feel like? What is he thinking? Or how does he react to this stuff apart from, oh, can I sing tonight or not? Which is a thing that younger people deal with too. And I think that he's a guy who's got 50 years of experience under his belt at this point. And but yeah, what you were saying about the music, he does a great version of Atlantic City for a little while, Springsteen, that really works. But the thing that I thought was great was When I Paint My Masterpiece, right off the top.
Oh yeah.
And because if you've heard that song, you've almost definitely heard it when it was a 27, 28-year-old Levon Helm singing it. To hear I'm not even sure how old he is in this movie. Just realized that I have no idea how old he was here, but
he was born in 40, I believe, or 41.
Yeah, so okay. I'm
really bad in his 60s,
but 68.
I know.
Yeah,
mid 60s. Say he's, like it's so ragged, and it somehow works because it's being played over old footage, and it's showing him when he's younger and at different points of his life, and there's just something really poignant about having that gravelly voice, but that voice that's been through all this other stuff, and now it's singing this song again.
Yeah, well, and When I Paint My Masterpiece is like, I mean, I don't think it's accidental that they chose it for that. That's what's amazing about that song is it's an accomplished artist at the end of his life who has not conceded that his best work is still ahead of him.
Yeah,
and to some extent, Levon is that at this point, to the extent that he is in the process of writing a Grammy Award-winning album during the course of this movie, which we haven't even mentioned. But this is, in addition, the two main things that are happening in his musical life at this point are he's got these rambles going on and sort of mini hub and spoke tours that grew out of the rambles, where he would play the same material, mostly just in like around the East Coast. And then out from that grows the album The Dirt Farmer, which he releases and wins a Grammy, and we get to see his reaction to that. And like, as much as he has the sort of like hardened cynicism about the stupidity of the Grammys, we also see when he finds out that he won for that album, not the Lifetime Achievement Award bullshit that was cooked up by the bastard Suits, but the actual acknowledgement for his new record. And like, he and everyone else in his life is happy as a pig in shit to get that. They are genuinely happy to have that recognition.
Yeah. The probably the character who appears in this movie next to other than Levon the most is Larry Campbell, who is so great. So Larry Campbell, I mean, he's a musician who's had a long career. I mean, I know him mostly as one of the most acclaimed guitarists in Bob Dylan's Never Ending Tour band. He played Bob from like 97 to 2004. And
he's the guitarist with Dylan throughout all like the brunt of the time I was seeing Dylan.
Right. Yeah. And with Charlie Sexton, he had this guitar duo for like 4 or 5 years with Dylan. It was just incredible. And but so it is interesting that like Dylan is not also really mentioned in this movie at all. Because, famously Dylan sort of made their career in a way. And he sings Dylan's songs a lot, and they, recorded at Woodstock together, and the Basement Tapes, and then they went on tour together. I mean, Dylan shows up when they're talking about the 74 tour, like in some photos and things. But like Levon lives in Woodstock because they followed Dylan up there, and like he just stayed, and this guy's an important part of his life. And and then he like becomes very close personal and musical collaborators with Charlie Sexton, who had spent all these years playing with Dylan. And I would maybe just as a Dylan head, I was hoping that somehow the relationship with Bob would come up or something. And it just seems like it's not relevant. So it doesn't, so I was disappointed on that point. And I know it's not a movie about Bob, but I don't know. I figured like in this kind of thing, you're summing things up. You want to address some of the more important people in your life. And I don't know. I guess maybe it just didn't come up.
So your request is address some of the more important people in his life. My counteroffer would be address no one who's ever approached Levon Helm in his life, because that's what this movie does. There's no discussion of Robbie. There's basically no discussion of anyone.
Garth isn't mentioned.
Garth, that name only happens when they're on a show and he's announced totally separately, right?
The Ed Sullivan show.
No one else. Yeah, Ed Sullivan. That's who it is. Yeah, no one else says his name at any point.
Yeah, which is kind of weird.
Even Levon doesn't say his name.
Yeah, and again, I don't think that's like an omission because like there's some beef necessarily.
No.
It's just not. It's not the story. It just didn't come up, or it's not the story they're telling.
I saw this described as like a cinema verite kind of approach to like that term was used a lot of places. This documentary wasn't really planned, right? This documentary was the director was there to shoot a music video, I believe, and then kind of hung around and stuck with them, and then kept filming stuff. And so it wasn't really intended to be this. I think is part of it. But at the same time, it's also just captures what's important to Levon is just the whole family element. Like, even when he talks about Rick and Richard, for instance, like these guys have been dead for years. By this point, Rick has been dead for years. Richard's been dead for decades, and he talks about them like their family. And I think you mentioned that, Andy. Like that's this idea. This is a family movie. Like this is a movie about Levon around the people he chooses to be around.
Yeah,
and just living his life. Like it's very of the moment. It's not very. It doesn't look back unless someone else is doing it for him.
Yeah, and the relationship with Larry Campbell is fitting in that way as well. They have lots of long scenes where they're rehearsing together or where they're writing music together. They um, they get some sort of unfinished music, some uh, lyrics that are like partially done that they're going to work up,
The lyrics
and
by
they're
Hank
going
Williams.
yeah by
Hank
Hank. Oh
Williams,
yeah, unfinished material by Hank Williams that Levon seems pretty tickled by. And they're going through and they're reading through and they say, okay, here's a good one, and they're working on it. And the sense I got from their relationship was just like Larry Campbell kind of just takes this on as a charge. Like Levon wants to keep doing this, and Levon to a certain extent can keep doing this, but he can't do it all. He needs another strong musician to like be there to do the remainder that he can't quite do. And I'm going to take it upon myself to help him get the rest of the way. Whether it's putting together this song or whether it's putting together this tour, it's almost like a biblical relationship. And like I'm going to do what I can with my abilities to pick this guy up and carry him. And it's sweet to watch. It's just really sweet to watch when they are completing these lyrics and Levon begins his process. You see him just throw his head back, close his eyes, and start thinking like what are the lyrics that are going to complete this sentiment that they've put together.
And there's that great little bit where Larry reads one line that Hank Williams has written, and then it's like what comes next, and he's throwing some ideas out, and Levon just sits there. Yeah, he throws his head back, his eyes are closed, he's sitting in his chair, and it's like a long beat, and you're like waiting for like, oh, it's just gonna come
Here's
out, and finally he just
magical inspiration.
Yeah, and then after this long beat, he just stands up off the chair and he goes, "Yeah, that's a tough one."
And he just leaves.
And walks out of the room.
He walks out of the room. Yeah,
It's so good.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
I did write one of my other notes is love me some Larry Campbell.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's also through Larry that I think we get the most direct reflection on the band apart from Barney Hoskins. Like Barney,
Yes.
like he actually says, he tries to guess. Sorry for my shuffling papers, guys. This is real old school for your podcast.
It's all good.
That's great. We like it. Atmospherics.
Yeah, it's atmospheric. Okay. But he just, he says basically that as far as Levon was concerned, they were all supposed to be in this together. And when you hear him talk about how Rick and Richard, and to a large degree himself, like none of them did well financially. Like they were all struggling. We see Rick's widow living in a retirement home, like a 1-bedroom, not particularly fancy place. Like I think that, we see all these things and it sets that up. And then Larry kind of just brings it home by saying, I don't want to comment on this stuff too much. Like, I don't want to try and guess exactly what's happening in his mind. But, I think he feels like they were abandoned. I think he feels like Robbie abandoned them. And then you look at basically from 1976 onwards with these guys, and it doesn't go well. I mean, like you said, Rick tries to have a solo career. It doesn't go well. The band kind of tours, but they're struggling along. They're not producing anything new, really. Then Richard commits suicide, and then they're kind of struggling along, and then Rick dies. Like they never have a lot of cash. Like I think he just sees the struggle that everyone else went through, and I think Robbie didn't necessarily have that struggle. I think it's almost like it just kept feeding itself. And I think you get that sense from how Larry frames it.
Yeah, and it's hard to know because it's not said that like clearly there's financial struggles. Like there's talk with some business advisors or I don't know who, accountants or somebody like about a tour and like, can you do this tour? Like, can you suck it up and do this like 8-week tour? And that'll kind of get you set, for the next year or so. And he's doing these rambles, which are these concerts at his, barn in Woodstock, New York. And I know there were like kind of celebrities and people would pop in, but I don't know that like, I mean, maybe they tried to get Bob Dylan or like bigger name. You know what I mean? Maybe there was an effort to try to get like, hey, we can make a lot of money if we put a, benefit show together for Levon with, whoever, all these big acts that, respect him and love him, the Black Crowes. And, there's probably a million bands that love the band and Wilco, I don't know, whoever it is.
Mhm.
Like, maybe they tried to do that, and maybe they didn't get, they couldn't get it together or whatever. It's not mentioned. But just the sense I get is like Levon just wanted to do things his own way.
Yes.
So like it seems like that's not the kind of thing that he would have been down for, is like a big Radio City Music Hall spectacular, raise money for Levon Helm. Like he just seems like he would rather scrape it out
Yeah.
than
Dirt farmer.
be a dirt farmer,
farmer,
exactly, than
Yeah.
then go Hollywood, or then make it about him in that way. And I don't know, I'm just reading between the lines, but that's the sense you get.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, so I very privileged to have seen Levon around this time, in Baltimore. He came down. It was in April 2008. The hangout with Chris Robinson and Billy Bob is in August of 2008.
Hmm.
So it's like really right around that same time. And yeah, like he didn't play the most like famous venue in the area. It wasn't like front page news in the Baltimore Sun. It didn't have like the trappings of like, hey, come see the legend behind the weight, or any of this other stuff. It was like everybody who was there knew the stakes, knew like, hey, this is probably the last time you're going to see Levon Helm. If you're seeing him for the first time, congratulations, you're going to hold that deer in a few years. But it was but it was not a big affair. It just wasn't a big thing. There wasn't there wasn't a red carpet out front of it. There weren't billboards around town. And I think you kind of get that when he's talking to the like the business people about the show. Like they're trying to tell him like, hey, he says like, this is what the Allman Brothers do. At that time, the Allman Brothers would do like 20 nights at the Beacon Theater within like a month and a half every year. And that would set them up for the whole year. So they didn't have to tour. They didn't have to do this whole thing. Beacon was small enough that they could sell it out. And it seems like they're trying to say like, there's two models here. You can either tour or you can do something like what the Allmans are up to.
Yeah.
And like, it seems like they kind of choose like, well, what if we just kind of do our own thing with my own people here?
Yeah. He kind of reminds me a little bit of another famous Canadian who passed away recently, Gordon Lightfoot. There's this element of like Gordon, I don't think ever really tried to do things the easy way.
Yeah.
And he always just seemed to want to, like, I saw him play. I've seen him play here like a couple of years ago, in the town I live in, which is not a very big place. He played his hometown a bunch of times. He's played a lot of other, like he just plays. Like it's just almost like this is what I do. And like I don't need this other stuff. Like Lightfoot has an association with Joni Mitchell and with Bob Dylan and with a
right.
lot of other people, and he never really seemed to play that up.
Right.
And it was just I was always amazed when I'd kind of look at his tour and say like, oh, well, when could I maybe catch him? And it was just always going on. Like he was always like, it was never, there was rarely going like really far afield, like big,
Right.
huge tours, but he was doing this stuff where he could be kind of close-ish to Toronto.
Yeah.
And still play his shows. And there was something similar there. It's also kind of similar in that Gord also lost his voice by the end. He had a stroke and then he had some other issues. And so seeing him, every time I saw him live, basically he just had not much there. It was a whisper and it was a struggle. But I kind of, as I was watching Levon, I was kind of, I think, superimposing Lightfoot a little bit on top of him, because that's another of my favorites. And I was just like, there's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah. And the Rambles, that was a small space. I have a friend who just went and saw a show there like a month ago, and it's like a few hundred people. It's not, it's not even if you like really gouged people, you wouldn't make that much money by playing shows there.
Right. And it's kind of way out there,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it is hard to conceive that, these people that are so, to me, are such big stars, you know what I mean? Like in my life, in my world,
Yeah.
were not, just living on easy street as they should have been, like in a more just world. Like those guys could have
Right.
just cruised from, right after they recorded, Big Pink and the Brown album. Like that could have been it. And I know life's not that simple. And I don't know, like I'm sure there was money coming in. They certainly talk a lot about all the drugs and partying and so forth. And I don't know that Levon was like, living a big fancy life, but I don't know what he was up to in the 70s. You can easily see it all going up his nose. And he doesn't really he talks about bitterness about not getting the the publishing because of the whole thing about basically the narrative is that Robbie Robertson like met Levon and built this whole basically made him a character in all these songs, and that he sort of profited off of his authenticity and his background, almost like cultural appropriation in a weird way. Is the argument there, because
That's how it's typically used. Canadians appropriating Arkansas. That's
Not sure if you can see the words cultural
Oh,
appropriation.
you wrote that
right
on your.
there.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, nailed it. Yes, this is exactly
yeah.
where this is intersectionality rears its ugly head. Is when a Native American, half Native American, half Jewish Canadian takes the life story of an Arkansas white cracker. That's exactly what it's about. But yeah, so that's kind of the narrative, and he talks about the bitterness of that and how like he and the other guys didn't see the same rewards, and that like the details of music copyright stuff was elucidated a little bit in the film, which is my favorite. That's where I all of a sudden snap too. I'm like, intellectual property, let's go.
Yeah.
Are they going to get the details right?
Yeah, they got to write enough.
See any contracts?
They got to write enough.
Like just got to put them on screen. Right? Come on.
Yes, this is for the IP lawyers in the audience. but yeah, I mean, it's I'm kind of I'll let you go, Eamon, but yeah, I mean, it's brought up a little bit, but then there's no other discussion. There's no, like, he doesn't say like, oh, I regret not being wise financially. You know what I mean? He doesn't have regrets about the way that he lived his life, and that seems to be included. At least, again, I'm reading from omission about what his feelings about it are.
The story that the movie is telling, whether this is the reality or not, the story that we are getting from the actual film itself is that the money kind of only mattered in that he was his friends, his brothers lived rough lives and had a harder life than he thinks they should have had. But that the way it's framed around the cult, I wrote, like I said, I wrote down cultural appropriation because to me, like that's the story they're trying to tell. He's angry that his own story was stolen and used for someone else to make money off of, and his friends didn't get a cut of it. He didn't get a cut out of it. It's like anyone would be pissed off that if they felt their own story or their own culture was taken by someone who wasn't from that culture. Like we just On Record Roulette, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere. On Record Roulette, we just talked about a CCR album, and we kind of talked a little bit about this because John Fogerty puts on a voice, right? That's not his accent. And we talked about cultural appropriation as being
he's from San Francisco. He's not.
He's from San Francisco, but he sounds like he could be from New Orleans. Like he's like
he literally has a song "Born on the Bayou."
Well, almost everything, like Green River. He's got like all these other songs that are very very Southern songs. And we kind of talked a little bit about this idea, and that one feels really egregious looking back now, like to the point where no one could launch a career like that, doing an accent, and especially an accent that I think is often associated with Black people.
Yeah,
like it's not, but like this, when I listened to, I was like, this is a whole new dimension to this that I hadn't really thought of. I always understood the publishing thing, but it kind of added this element to say, like, he was pissed off that his culture was taken by someone who wasn't from that culture and used, and then that person profited and he didn't. And that made it so much clearer to me, I think, than maybe any other. And he's not the one who says that, but that's what the film is trying to get across, I think.
Yeah. Now, I'll say, though, that I at the end, I wrote this is like, it's sort of one must imagine Sisyphus happy conclusion. Like, you go through all of this stuff: Levon's health, Levon's financial problems, the loss of Richard and Rick, and the conclusion of the movie, to me, is Levon Helm led a great life that he was happy with, and it ended among family who loved him in comfort. And so all this is true, and they they're unsparing about it, but I don't think there's any, like, I don't think Levon would want to. He doesn't talk about those things because he wouldn't want to think of himself as a victim.
Yeah.
It would be unbecoming to his way of thinking about the world, and also I think unreflective of the way he views his life. I think he thinks he ended up having as good a go of it as he could, and that he was really happy by the end. And I think that's where the movie wants us to land.
I think so. And I think in terms of like Robbie's perspective would have been that he's a storyteller and he tells stories through music. And so like he did the music for, all these films with Scorsese, Raging Bull, Gangs of New York, The Irishman, Silence. They're not about him. They're not about his particular cultural background, or maybe some parts of Killers of the Flower Moon and things like that. But for the most part, he's dropping into a culture that he is an observer of, and writing and telling stories about those people. And that's maybe I would think that that's just his perspective. It's like, this is just the material I was working with, and so I don't know, I guess that's the defense.
Yeah, I would really recommend anyone who watches this also watches Once We're Brothers. And the reason just from a kind of, because it is, the Once We're Brothers is Robbie Robertson in the band. And I think that there's, not to say that they're equivalent, or that, I think you just learn a lot about like how all this is being framed, and that they're both choosing the framing to a degree.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see it. And I feel like neither one of them, I don't know, like Robbie's never accusatory. He's kind of like, I was just there and it didn't seem like things were working out. Everyone was on drugs and I wanted to do other stuff. And, like you can see that, like you can understand that perspective. But I really, like, even comparing the two films, like this feels like a lived in film.
Yes.
Like the way it's shot. It's even, it kind of feels like it's from an earlier era almost.
Yeah. It's like a family video, home video.
Yeah, it's not a great quality. Like that feels like Levon, and Once We're Brothers feels like Robbie. It feels like someone who had the resources to put together a really kind of snappy movie.
I couldn't agree more that both of the movies reflect the subjects of them completely. That, like, Robbie's movie about at the end is, to some degree, like setting the record straight. Like he wants to have his time to have his say about, hey, you've all read Levon's book, but here's my perspective, right? And maybe he's even a little bit like, maybe Robbie's takes liberties, or is a little bit too willing to shape the legacy while everyone else is either dead or has stopped talking. And he has ample time to show the images of them when they were young and beautiful, and he was walking around with Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell. And Levon doesn't want to talk about any of that, but is happy to show you videos of him hanging out in his kitchen with his daughter and his best buddy.
Right, drinking out of a red Solo cup.
Drinking out of a red
dog
Solo
hanging
cup,
around.
with saying, I love this one. I wrote down Levon math. A 160-pound man with a 20-pound catfish in 5 to 7 feet of water makes one hell of a show. Levon says that to the crew. It's just like, he gets going and you're like, where is he going with this? And it's just, it's like, is that a Southern saying? Is that
just a known thing? I wasn't really sure what to do with that, but I agree with him.
I hear it. I'm like, all right, probably is. He also says, and this is like nice little Southern wisdom, that's the problem with getting sick. First you try to get well, then you try to keep from going bankrupt.
Not in Canada.
Yeah. Well. Okay. So. Yeah, I mean, we kind of knocked Once We're Brothers when we covered it, and that's I think that's all fair. I do like that they both exist because there's a million bands where there's sort of two main characters, and the opposition of them is the story of the band in a way. You know what I mean? You can think of a million Oasis, I don't know, the Beatles, whatever. Going back and uh and not just bands, but all different types of groups. But I can't think of one where they're, each of those two characters has their own documentary. You know what I mean? Like from their side. So you get to just sit and experience both different perspectives. And, like it would be great if we had that for all these other, artists. And, but we, a lot of times those are just combined into one film or whatever. Or you get the history of the Eagles where they're all just, having it out with each other, and that's great in its own way. But yeah, these two very interesting characters having their own totally different films, to some extent about the same, in part about the same material and the same part of life we're really fortunate to have that, with them both being gone, especially.
Imagine like to really hammer home how crazy this particular documentary is, though. It's like if John Lennon hadn't been killed and he and Paul McCartney were at the same point in making this, and Paul McCartney's was making a point of saying Paul McCartney and the Beatles, and this is how I was part of the Beatles, and this is how I was an important part of the Beatles. And John Lennon's was like, I'm not going to talk about the Beatles. And like barely even talks about them. Like he doesn't talk about them. It's even that is odd to me, the way that Robbie really wants to talk about the legacy. I think I said this during that last episode, that to me it seems important to Robbie that the legacy of the band is raised up as much as he can. And I don't think that's just for his sake. I think that he kind of understands that this issue between he and Levon has really led to the concept of the band for a lot of people just kind of disappearing. But it is so weird that that is the thing. That's the reason we all know who Levon Helm is.
Sure.
And he doesn't want to talk about it. It's a very odd thing. But to your point earlier, Andy, about kind of like he lived the life he wanted to live. Actually, I think we've all made that point a couple times now.
Yeah.
But one thing I did know at the very end is I almost would have preferred that they did not add the card at the end to say that he had died.
Yeah.
There's something so final about that in a way, and I know it's the end of the film, but I mean, when it was technically actually finished originally, he had not died yet, I believe. And then he died in 2012. The film was finished in 2010. They put that on afterwards, but there was something, they leave it kind of almost hopeful, but that doom is coming. That he's not healthy, but it's like he kind of, you leave it with this is the life that I'm living.
Well, and to my point about like the one must imagine Sisyphus happy, it's like, doom is coming. Guess what? For fucking everybody. Like,
wait a minute.
Like it's like, there's a lot of bad. You listen to the lyrics of these songs. There's a lot of tough messages coming home about the finality of this whole fucking thing, and like, when you don't have the card there, you have that, which is, well, he's gonna die, but like, bro.
I got to the end, and that was immediately popped in my head. Like, that's a mistake. And I actually went and looked up when, like, did they put that on afterwards? I think this came out before he died, didn't it? And they did. And that's through, like, that idea. It's too final. It's too final for something, because that last scene kind of leaves it open ended. Yeah, like it leaves it like, hey, this is the world. This is my life. This is what I'm doing. And that's what you get for an hour and a half almost, is you get a picture of his life in his mid 60s or whatever.
Yeah, you get that scene with him. He records that song and he nails the lyrics, and Larry screams, "God damn it, Levon!"
yeah. He's
so good.
Larry's talking about some particular nuance in Levon's vocal style that's always been there, and he's trying to kind of get it again. And it's like, he's like, that's the part that tugs your heartstrings, and it's like you can.
It's like when you come up here and here and high,
right.
Yeah.
And it's really great, and you can see like, oh, this is what like a music producer does. You know what I mean? It's like more than almost any documentary I've ever seen. That one moment is like, oh yeah, he's getting something out of a guy that he didn't even think could be achieved again. and he makes it happen by convincing him that he's that person or reminding him of who he is or what he can accomplish. It's really such a great moment. I mean, Larry Campbell, props to that guy. But yeah, I mean, you get one thing I liked about the movie. Another thing is you get just a little clip of the old man hitting the drums. Just a little, you know what I mean? Like his vocal talents are diminished, and but when he sits at the drum kit, and I know he didn't play that much drums, like, I'm sure it was physically difficult for him, but you see him playing, and it's like that kind of particular swing that he had that like drives all those songs that we love, like, is still there. That beat, like the pulse is still there. And it's like, wow, that, that's such a great moment because he's not going to sing the way he did in 1972 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that voice is not coming back, and hearing him sing as an older man, like, is rewarding in its own way. But when he plays the drums, it's like it's right there. It's amazing.
Could you imagine Levon saying anything as complimentary of the music that he helped create as he says about the farmland, the productivity of the soil of his farm?
Yeah.
Like, he is so beaming with pride when he's talking with the guy, presumably, I guess, the guy that helps actually farm the land that he's on. They say, this is some of the most productive soil in central New York.
Yeah.
And he goes, that's right. That is right. Just like, so like,
it was the most
like
good old boy
man,
thing I've ever seen.
It's like he would if somebody said, like, these are some of the most important songs ever written in the history of American music, he'd be like, shut, like he would be
right.
He would be bothered by that. He would not like to hear that. But compliment his farm, the productivity of his soil.
Well, I don't know that it seemed to me like that wasn't his farm. Like, he was just hanging out with these guys because he talks about how, like, he would drive by and he would just pull over and watch these guys on their combines. And then that's how he got to know them. So I think they were just his neighbors, and they were like, well, "Why don't you come on up on the tractor?" You know what I mean? He's like, "Hell yeah!" You know what I mean? So I don't think that was his life. I think those were just like, it was like a slice of life of the community he lives in, and how that's where he fits. And it was also a way of being like, he's not Hollywood. The place he's most comfortable is like talking to these guys about the alfalfa or whatever they're. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong because spoiler, I'm not a farm boy.
He's a blue collar guy, and he's like there's something that stuck out when I read Robbie's biography. He says the thing he was attracted to when he was like wanting to get into this, actually he says it in the documentary too, is showbiz. He always kind of views this as Robbie always views this as showbiz, which is why I think it's so easy for him to kind of transition to, hey, I'm gonna go over here and do this now. I'm gonna do this now, and I think Levon kind of sees this as more of a workman-like thing, and I think that's why he's like, that's why I just play my shows and I play, like whoever will take me and whatever. I'm not gonna ask my big shot friends for help, and that's actually a big, like I think that's a thing that's that kind of, I don't know, pride is the right word. Like, I come from a pretty small, pretty rural place, and I think that feels like that feels familiar to me. People who there's a lot of pride in them, and say like, hey, I'm going to show up and do my job, and I'm going to do the work that needs to be done. And that's how he sees his career as a drummer. It doesn't matter if he's played in front of insanely massive audiences. He's a guy who's just, I'm here to play music, and that's it. So I think that's a big difference between the two of them. But I think that's why he sees a farm and he's like, these are my people too.
Yeah.
There's not a difference between me and that farmer. We both go to work.
Yeah. Right. Even though he left that life, it's not because he feels like he's better than them, or he, you know what I mean? He doesn't like look down on the people that he came from. Anyway.
I mean, I definitely do. I look down on all the people
of course.
I came from, but not. But he seems to have really held on to that.
You're all about showbiz. Let's keep it real.
We got podcasts all over the place. Come on, man.
All right. Are we? How are we doing here? You think we've given this his due?
I think I've reached the end of my notes too. Except just say Larry Campbell. Also, I was privileged to see him play with Little Feat for their 50th anniversary. So Larry Campbell, man, hell of a musical life from that guy.
Larry Campbell, guy who Andy has seen play.
With Bob Dylan, Levon Helm, and Little Feat.
Props to Larry Campbell.
Dude.
Not so much to you, but yeah. No, that's.
Dude, I mean, what a guy!
Yeah.
Like, you know, like that's, it's such a. I love those sorts of like bits of rock and roll history. These guys who they were never stars of themselves, but they were integral pieces of multiple different things.
Eamon, anything else we need to cover? We have we've done it here.
I think we've done it. There's nothing else on it. Like I said, nothing in my notes. So yeah, I guess that means I've got nothing.
I guess that means we've done it all. I
would just say this is a 1 hour and 20 minute movie about a guy dying that makes me smile for 1 hour and 10 minutes. Like just like dumb smile on my face the whole movie.
Yep.
Yeah, it's I mean, like I said, if I try to pitch it to somebody and I'm like, you should watch this movie about this, you know, old man who's broke and, you know, has 1 foot in the grave and 1 on a banana peel, it might not sound like a real pick me up, but yeah, just the guy's life spirit. It's one of those documentaries where it's like a triumph of the human spirit would be like on the poster, and you'd be like, get me out of here. You know what I mean? But it really does kind of it in an understated way. It delivers on that kind of promise.
It's clear that family means everything to Levon, and I think it really does, because of the fact that he's never interviewed, because you're only just hearing him be around people. It does kind of feel like you're just getting to be a part of that for that time. You're getting to be a part of his, you're getting a direct insight into what it's like to be Levon Helm's family for about an hour and 10 of this hour and 20 minutes.
Right. Well, Eamon, we always like your insights, and hopefully we'll have you on again, and maybe we'll have you talk about some other musical artists. Maybe we'll do a random, some kind of Rock Docs roulette and force you to watch a documentary about somebody else. But no, thanks again for doing this. This is a lot of fun, and we hopefully we won't make it too long again before we can drag you back here kicking and screaming.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, everybody check out Record Roulette. It's a lot of fun, even when me and Andy aren't on. And and yeah, of course, support Treble and all that good stuff. And yeah, thanks for listening to Rock Docs.
Listen now, children, a story of town of a woman they call Annalie. She had a fine son and she raised him up well, and a daughter as lovely as she. I'll return to you, dear, in the dimming of day, as a sparrow returns to her nest. I'll return to you, dreaming with each lullaby. Hold your sweet weary head to my breast. You know, one of the baddest damn things you can get a hold of is one of them goddamn platypuses that lives over in Australia, them duckbill. They got a couple of spurs on their back legs, and they can dig them damn spurs into you, and they got venom in them. And they say it's the platypus? Them duck-billed platypuses, yeah. Baddest little bastards
You ever think of it
in
as a threat,
Australia, yeah.